From humble beginnings to a multi-billion-dollar industry, video games have come a long way. They've evolved from simple pixelated screens to immersive worlds that capture millions. In this video, we're diving deep into the fascinating history and evolution of video games. So it all began in 1952. Back then, computers were primarily used for academic and military purposes, until a British professor created OXO, also known as tic-tac-toe. 6 years later, in 1958, a man named William Higginbotham created a game called Tennis for Two. The game was played using Ocelope, and the game consisted of bouncing a dot back and forth like tennis itself. This was the first ever video game where two users were able to play against each other. 4 years later, in 1962, a group of MIT students developed Space War on a PDP-1 mini computer. The game was essentially a dogfight between two players, the winner being the one who destroys the other player's spaceship first. This game is considered one of the most influential games in early video game history and inspired many other games in the future. As computers were still very expensive during this time period, only a select few were able to play video games. But the video game industry then entered into a new era when the first ever arcade game was released, known as Computer Space, in 1971. The game involved a flying rocket ship in space in a dogfight with two flying saucers. The goal of the game is to score more hits than the flying saucer. The game was encased in an odd-looking cabinet, and the game was pitched to arcades and bars. Computer Space, however, wasn't much of a success, and after its release, Nolan Bushnell, who was behind the creation of Computer Space, decided to form the company Atari. 1 year later, after the release of Computer Space, Atari released Pong, which became the first ever commercially successful video game. And it does not take a genius to figure out why. The game involved two paddles and a ball. The players had to use the paddles to hit the ball back and forth, the aim being for a player to earn more points than the opponent. And a point is earned when one of the players failed to return the ball back to the other. Its simplicity and competitiveness made the game very addictive, which is why it's no shocker that the game became a huge success. I think it's very important to remember that it was this single game that propelled the video game industry into what it is today, and therefore it deserves our props. During the same time period, the first ever video game console was released, the Magnavox Odyssey, in 1972. However, this console wasn't much of a success, selling only 200,000 units in 3 years. In 1975, Atari released a home version of Pong, which became as successful as its arcade counterpart. Now in 1977, Atari released the Atari 2600, a home console, which also became a huge success. Now, what many refer to as the golden age of arcade games began with the release of Space Invaders in 1978. The game was a fixed shooter game involving a laser cannon in which the aim of the game is to eliminate the aliens by shooting them. The game became a huge commercial success, bringing in a net profit of $450 million, making it one of the most successful games of all time. The game popularized the concept of high scores and is referred to by many as one of the most influential games of all time. In 1980, Pac-Man was released, which also became a huge success. Its iconic character and the maze chase makes it one of the most memorable video games of all time. In 1981, Donkey Kong was released, which introduced the character that would become an international world star. The character's name was Jumpman, but you probably know him as Mario. During this golden era of arcade games, arcades became popular social gathering spots where people of all ages came to socialize, play games, and just have a good time. Now in 1983, there was a video game crash that almost destroyed the industry and led to the bankruptcy of several companies producing game consoles and home computers in North America. This occurred due to the oversaturation of the market, with dozens of consoles and hundreds of low-quality games. games. Now, in 1985, Nintendo released the NES, standing for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which actually saved the dying video game industry from the crash 2 years prior. And it was a massive success, selling millions of units worldwide, and the console introduced many iconic franchises such as Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. In 1988, Sega released the Sega Genesis, known for its advanced graphics, fast-paced gameplay, and iconic titles such as Sonic the Hedgehog and Mortal Kombat, and being one of the first consoles to offer 16-bit graphics and sound, providing a superior gaming experience to previous 8-bit consoles such as the NES. The release of this console marked the beginning of the console war between Sega and Nintendo that took place in the late 80s, early 90s. Nintendo released the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which was Nintendo's entry into the 16-bit market, providing greater graphic and sound capabilities than the previous Nintendo Entertainment System. The rivalry led to higher quality standards as both companies strive to outdo each other by producing high quality and more engaging games. This console era as a whole helped cement video games as a mainstream form of entertainment, appealing to a broader audience beyond children. Now, a new era, referred to as the 3D revolution, began in the mid-90s, which marked a transformative period of the video game industry. This era saw the transition from 2D graphics to immersive 3D environments. This transition was assisted by the leap in computer technology, the introduction of powerful GPUs capable of rendering complex 3D environments, and the use of techniques such as texture mapping and shading, adding realism to 3D models, making these virtual worlds more visually appealing. In 1994, Sony released the first ever PlayStation, which happened to be the first console that focused on 3D graphics, with more powerful hardware than previous consoles, and the usage of CDs as opposed to cartridges. The PlayStation introduced many new titles such as Gran Turismo, Resident Evil, and Final Fantasy VII. The success of the PlayStation established Sony as a major force in the console market and laid the foundations for the future PlayStation consoles. In 1996, Nintendo released the Nintendo 64, which contained a 64-bit CPU, hence the name, and was designed specifically for 3D graphics. With it was released Super Mario 64, which was an open-world 3D game. It was the best-selling Nintendo 64 game and is considered one of the greatest games of all time, and remains one of the most influential games of all time as well. The 3D revolution contributed towards significant growth in the video game market, attracting a broader audience and increasing sales. In the early 2000s, the PlayStation 2 was released, which has become the best-selling console of all time. Its DVD player, as an added functionality, was a huge selling point, attracting those who don't even play video games. The console allowed gamers to play online with other people through a network adapter, thereby introducing the functionality of online multiplayer to the world. Around the same time period, the original Xbox was also released by Microsoft, becoming another competitor in the console market and beginning the PlayStation versus Xbox war that still goes on to this day. It was the first console to include an internal hard drive, providing faster load times and the ability to download content. The Xbox introduced Xbox Live, allowing for the ability for online multiplayer gaming and other communication features. In 2005, the Xbox 360 was released, and in 2006, the PS3 was released, and for 7 years, they competed against each other for the best console of the time. Both consoles came with upgraded hardware, improving gaming performance and graphics. The Xbox 360 added the concept of achievements, which rewarded players with points for completing tasks in a game. It also came with the Kinect, a motion-sensing input device allowing for controller-free gaming. PlayStation 3 contained a Blu-ray device, allowing for movies in Blu-ray format to be played on the PlayStation 3. It also had backward compatibility, allowing PS2 games to be played on the device. Online play was also free on the PS3, unlike on the Xbox 360, where you had to pay a monthly fee for Xbox Live in order to play online. Both consoles introduced many iconic games. On the Xbox 360 was released Halo 3, Gears of War, and Forza Motorsport, which all greatly showcased the 360's graphical capabilities. With the PlayStation 3 came Uncharted, Last of Us, and Gran Turismo 5. Around the same time period, the Nintendo Wii was also released, which also became a huge success. While the 360 and PS3 focused on computational power, Nintendo instead focused on targeting a broader audience with its family-friendly and unique games. With the Wii came many iconic titles such as the beloved Wii Sports, Mario Kart, and many others. Now, around this same time period, the iPhone was released, which began the smartphone era. With this came the release of the App Store, which prompted the rise of mobile phone games. Many of the notable mobile phone games include Angry Birds, Cut the Road, Fruit Ninja, and Temple Run. A touchscreen interface of smartphones allowed for intuitive and innovative ways to play video games, making the games engaging and therefore a huge success. The games being free also meant that anyone with a smartphone could play these games, making these games even more successful. The release of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One in 2013 represents the next generation of video game consoles. Both consoles were a huge success and released multiple other consoles, for example the Xbox One S and the PS4 Pro. In 2017, the Nintendo Switch was released, which represented a new innovation in the video game industry. Because of its ability to function as both a home console and a portable handheld device, the Switch was a huge success for Nintendo and introduced a wide range of popular games with it, such as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Super Mario Odyssey, and Animal Crossing's New Horizons. In 2020, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and S were released, which began the 9th generation of video game consoles, and is the current generation that we're in. While they both came with many key features and innovations as well as many notable games, currently the PS5 has outsold the Xbox Series X 3-1. So, as we can see, video games have come a very long way, and as we look into the future, we can only imagine how the video game industry will continue to innovate and grow.